They tell you at the schola that the bolt pistol is an extension of the Emperor's will, that when you squeeze the trigger you are merely the instrument through which his judgment flows. They drill this into you during the dawn exercises, repeat it during the afternoon recitations, whisper it as you clean your weapons before lights out. By the time you graduate, the words have worn grooves into your mind as deep as the prayer etchings on your pistols slide. I believed it once, with the fervor of youth and ignorance. I believed it the first time I executed a guardsman for cowardice. I believed it the 100th time. Somewhere between the 1000th execution and the day I put the muzzle against my adjutant's temple, the belief began to crack like frost-damaged stone. My name is Gaius Ventrall, and I served the God Emperor as a commissar for 23 years across 11 campaigns. I am writing this in what used to be the regimental commander's quarters aboard the troop transport Adamant Tithe, though Colonel Mercian has been dead for 6 months now, and no one has thought to reassign his rooms. Perhaps they think the space is cursed. Perhaps they are right. The ship's engines produce a constant low vibration that makes the stylus dance across the page, and I have to concentrate to keep my handwriting legible. The concentration is welcome. It keeps me from thinking about what I did on Gravel's world, or what I allowed to happen on the moon of Terteus Sigma, or the sound Mercian made when I finally put him out of his misery. I should begin at the beginning, though beginnings are deceptive things. Did my story begin when I was born on some nameless hive world, to parents whose faces I can no longer recall? Did it begin when the schola proctors selected me from the crowds of orphans, marking me as suitable for service? Or did it truly begin the day I received my commissar's cap and coat, when I was 21 years old, and still believed the Imperium was worth the blood it demanded? I will start there, with the commissioning ceremony on the fortress moon of Validus, because that is when I first tasted the copper flavor of duty fulfilled, and because that is when I met the man who would teach me what the bolt pistol really means. Senior Commissar Huldrecht was 67 years old, with a face like weathered granite, and eyes that had witnessed things no sane man should endure. He stood before the graduating class of 42 newly minted commissars, his uniform immaculate despite the scar tissue visible above his collar. Someone had tried to garrote him once, I later learned, and failed only because Huldrecht's neck muscles had calcified from decades of tension. He did not congratulate us. He did not welcome us to our sacred duty. Instead, he told us a story. "In my 3rd year of service," Huldrecht said, his voice carrying the rasp of damaged vocal cords, "I was assigned to the Celtrian 8th, a regiment of miners and tunnel fighters from an ash-waste world you have never heard of and never will. Good soldiers, by and large. Hard men from a hard place. The regimental commander was a fool named Ortek who had purchased his commission through family connections. He led us into an ambush on a world called Sephiran II, where the heretics had fortified a canyon network with interlocking fields of fire. We lost 2,000 men in the first day. By the 3rd day, the survivors were ready to retreat." Huldrecht paused, and I remember thinking that he was building to some inspirational conclusion about courage under fire or the importance of holding the line. I was wrong. Ortek wanted to withdraw, Huldrecht continued. He brought me his operational maps and showed me why continued assault was suicide. He was right, of course. Any sane tactical analysis supported immediate withdrawal to more defensible positions. But our orders from high command were explicit: hold the canyon approaches at any cost. So I drew my bolt pistol and executed Colonel Ortek for cowardice in the face of the enemy. Then I executed his second-in-command for questioning the Emperor's will. Then I promoted a sergeant named Krellin to acting colonel, and ordered him to continue the assault. We took the canyon in 4 more days, 90% casualties, but we took it. The silence in the ceremony hall was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel sweat gathering beneath my new cap. That, Huldrecht said, is what it means to be a commissar. You will make these choices, you will pull the trigger, you will watch good men die because you ordered them to charge into positions that cannot be taken, because the alternative is to let them live as cowards and traitors. Some of you will break under this burden. You will eat your bolt pistols or throw yourselves into enemy fire. The weak will find excuses. They will tell themselves the Imperium is cruel, that there must be a better way, that surely the Emperor would not demand such terrible things of his servants. Those of you who break will be forgotten. Those of you who endure will become something harder than human. You will become the instruments through which the Emperor's will is enforced, and you will do it knowing that mercy is the luxury of those who do not bear responsibility for humanity's survival. I left that ceremony with my bolt pistol heavy on my hip and Holdrek's words heavy in my mind. They assigned me to the Varantian 12th, a line infantry regiment with a respectable combat record and no recent disciplinary incidents. I thought I had been fortunate in my assignment. I thought I would prove myself through competence and dedication, that I would be the kind of commissar who inspired through example rather than terror. I was young enough to believe that such a thing was possible. My first execution happened 3 weeks after I joined the regiment. We were on a troop transport bound for a contested agri-world where orc raiders had been attacking grain silos, and I was conducting inspections of the enlisted quarters when I discovered Private Messon had smuggled a bottle of rotgut alcohol aboard ship. Messon was 19 years old, thin as a rifle barrel, with scared eyes and hands that trembled when I questioned him. He claimed he needed the alcohol to sleep, that without it he saw the faces of everyone who had died during the boarding action on our last deployment. He wept as he confessed. He begged for mercy. I remember standing there in that cramped berthing compartment with its recycled air that tasted of oil and sweat, looking at this terrified boy, knowing that leniency would be interpreted as weakness. The other soldiers in the compartment watched in silence, their faces carefully neutral. I could see them calculating, measuring me, determining what kind of commissar I would be. Haldrecht's words echoed in my mind. I drew my bolt pistol. Messon started to scream, tried to run, and I put a round through the back of his skull before he reached the hatch. The bolt round was designed to penetrate armor, to punch through reinforced bone and detonate inside the target. Messon's head came apart like overripe fruit dropped from a great height. Blood and brain matter sprayed across 3 bunks and a storage locker. The smell of propellant and ruptured viscera filled the compartment. This man endangered operational readiness through smuggling and consumption of prohibited substances, I said, my voice steady despite the nausea churning in my gut. His punishment is just. The Emperor protects those who maintain discipline. Clean this up and return to your duties. I left the compartment and made it to the nearest waste reclamation facility before I vomited. I stayed there for 20 minutes, hunched over a disposal unit, my hands shaking as badly as Messon's had been. Eventually the shaking stopped. Eventually I washed my face and straightened my uniform and returned to my duties. By evening mess, word had spread throughout the regiment that the new commissar would execute you for unauthorized alcohol. The men gave me a wide berth in the corridors, their eyes sliding away from direct contact. I had established my authority through blood, exactly as intended. The pattern repeated itself across my first year of service. A guardsman caught sleeping on watch executed. A corporal who questioned orders during a combat drill executed. A sergeant who suggested retreat when our position was being overrun by orc assault troops executed in full view of his squad before I personally led the countercharge that held the line. With each execution I felt something inside me calcify, some soft part of my conscience hardening into the same granite I had seen in Holdrek's face. I told myself this was necessary, that without the threat of the commissar's bolt pistol, the Imperial Guard would collapse into disorder and defeat. I told myself I was saving lives by taking lives, that my executions prevented the kind of mass cowardice that would result in entire regiments being slaughtered. I told myself many things in those early years, and most of them were even partially true, but there were things I could not explain away so easily. Moments when the clear logic of discipline and duty became muddied by the realities of human suffering. There was the time I executed a quartermaster for corruption after discovering he had been selling ration packs to supplement his pay, only to learn afterward that his family on his homeworld was starving due to failed tithes. and he had been trying to send them money. There was the lieutenant I shot for losing his nerve during an artillery barrage, whose last words were about his daughter's birthday. There was the entire squad I decimated for failing to hold a strategic ridge, choosing every 10th man by counting off and executing them while their comrades watched. One of those men, I later learned, had been carrying a citation for valor from a previous engagement in his pocket. I never knew his name. The Varantian 12th served for 5 years before the regiment was effectively destroyed during the siege of Talan's Gate. We were down to 30% strength when High Command finally authorized withdrawal. I had executed 27 men during that campaign, including 2 officers and a medici who had been rationing painkillers because our supply lines had been cut. Colonel Versham, the regimental commander, never questioned my judgments. He understood that commissars existed in a parallel chain of command, that our authority superseded his own in matters of discipline and morale. We maintained a cordial professional relationship built on mutual respect and careful distance. He died when a heretic artillery shell penetrated the command bunker, and I remember feeling relieved that I would not have to decide whether his eventual call for retreat constituted cowardice or tactical wisdom. The survivors of the Varantian 12th were folded into other regiments. I was reassigned to the Mordian 77th, a mechanized infantry unit with a reputation for rigid adherence to parade ground discipline even under fire. The Mordians were professional soldiers who treated war as a continuation of drill formations, and they initially viewed me with suspicion. Their previous commissar had died of natural causes, a rarity in our profession that they attributed to his understanding of Mordian military culture. I established my authority more subtly this time, focusing on uniform infractions and minor breaches of protocol rather than immediate executions. The Mordians responded well to this approach. They appreciated precision and formality, and I gave them a commissar who embodied those qualities. I executed only 3 men during my 2 years with the 77th, and 2 of those were clear-cut cases of desertion under fire. The regiment came to respect me, possibly even to like me in their reserved, disciplined way. It was during my service with the Mordians that I met Commissar Lysan Kelter. She was attached to the Mordian 83rd, and we encountered each other during a joint operation against a Genestealer cult uprising on a mining world designated only as Extraction Site Gamma. Lysan was 10 years my senior, with silver threading through her regulation haircut and a collection of execution tallies carved into the stock of her bolt pistol. Each notch represented 10 confirmed kills, and her pistol bore 47 marks. 470 men and women had died by her hand, and she carried that weight with a grim matter-of-factness that I found both horrifying and compelling. "You still think about them," she said to me one night as we reviewed tactical assessments in a prefabricated command shelter. The mining world's thin atmosphere created a constant wind that howled around the shelter's corners, a sound like distant screaming. "I can see it in the way you file your after-action reports. You list names and service numbers. You include details about circumstances. You are trying to justify each execution." "Should I not?" I asked. "We are not monsters. Our actions serve a purpose." Lysan laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We are absolutely monsters, Gaius. The difference between us and the heretics we fight is that we are the Emperor's monsters, and our monstrosity serves humanity rather than destroying it. But make no mistake, when you put a bolt round through a guardsman's skull for running from enemy fire, you are not administering justice. You are creating terror. Terror is the weapon we wield, and every commissar who pretends otherwise is lying to themselves." I wanted to argue with her, to defend the principles they had taught us at the Schola about duty and necessity and the sacred burden of enforcing discipline. But I had been doing this work for 7 years by then, and I knew she was right. I had seen the looks on soldiers' faces when I entered a room, the way conversation stopped, the way men who had been laughing a moment before went silent and tense. They did not respect me. They feared me, and that fear kept them in line when courage failed, when exhaustion became unbearable, when the horrors of war broke something fundamental inside them. I was the fear that forced broken men to keep fighting, the terror that overrode the terror of death. I was the Emperor's monster, exactly as Lysan said. "How do you live with it?" I asked her. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the cold light of the chemical lamp hanging from the shelter's ceiling. "I remind myself that every man I execute is one less point of failure in the Imperium's defenses. I tell myself that my cruelty prevents greater cruelties, that my murders prevent genocides, and when that stops working, I drink. Not on duty, of course. But in my quarters, when the ghosts get too loud, I drink until I cannot remember their faces. It is a weakness, but it is a weakness I have earned through service." I thought about Private Messon, about the lieutenant who had whispered his daughter's name as he died, about the quartermaster who had tried to save his starving family. I thought about all the small human moments I had terminated with a bolt pistol because doctrine demanded it. I did not drink that night, but I would start soon enough. The Mordian 77th was reassigned after we crushed the Genestealer uprising, sent to reinforce Imperial positions in a sector where Orc wags had been gaining momentum. I served with them for another year before receiving new orders. High Command was forming a composite regiment from the remnants of several understrength units, combining mechanized infantry, heavy weapon companies, and rough rider cavalry into a single fighting force, designated the 44th Regimental Combat Team. They needed a commissar with experience managing diverse military cultures, someone who could enforce discipline across units with different traditions and combat doctrines. My service record indicated I was suitable for such a posting. I accepted the assignment because commissars do not refuse orders, and because some part of me hoped that a new challenge might somehow redeem the work I had been doing. Colonel Mercian commanded the 44th RCT, and from our first meeting, I could see he was a different breed of officer than most I had encountered. He was 43 years old, a veteran of 16 campaigns, with a mind that grasped tactical nuance and strategic complexity with equal facility. He had risen through the ranks from enlisted trooper to officer through merit and battlefield promotion, and he commanded genuine respect from his soldiers rather than mere obedience. He also understood what commissars represented, and he made his position clear during our initial briefing. "I need you, Commissar Ventral," he said, his office aboard the command carrier furnished with operational maps and trophy heretic weapons. "These men and women come from 6 different destroyed regiments. They have different training, different traditions, different ideas about everything from formations to field rations. Conflict is inevitable. What I need from you is not terror. I need you to be the common standard they all fear equally. When Acadian tanker clashes with a Talan cavalryman over billet assignments, I need you to remind them both that failure to maintain cohesion is a capital offense. Can you do that without simply executing everyone who argues?" It was a fair question and a clever one. Mercian was asking me to be a tool of integration rather than pure enforcement, to use the threat of execution to create unity rather than simply punish failure. It was a more sophisticated application of the commissariat's authority than most commanders understood, and I appreciated his tactical insight, even as I recognized the trap inherent in the approach. If I became too integrated with the command structure, too focused on supporting Mercian's specific objectives, I would lose the independence that made commissars effective. I would become his commissar rather than the Emperor's commissar. "I will enforce discipline according to doctrine and necessity," I told him. "But I will not pretend that the bolt pistol is anything other than what it is, the final argument against failure. If your soldiers understand that, we will work well together." Mercian nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other. Welcome to the 44th RCT, Commissar. Emperor protects." "The Emperor protects," I echoed, and wondered which of us he would protect less. The 44th RCT deployed to a fortress world designated Bastion Primus, where intelligence indicated a major chaos incursion was imminent. We spent 3 months reinforcing defensive positions, drilling combined operations, and trying to forge 6 different regimental cultures into a coherent fighting force. I executed 4 men during this period. A trooper who assaulted a superior officer, a tech priest who was discovered practicing unauthorized augmentation on himself, and 2 cavalrymen who had murdered a mechanized infantryman over some imagined slight. Each execution was public, conducted before assembled formations, and each time I saw Mercian watching from the command platform with an expression I could not quite read. Approval? Resignation? Calculation? I could never tell. The Chaos invasion arrived 3 months and 7 days after our deployment. They came from the warp in a screaming wave of corrupted vessels, and they hit the fortress world with the fury of daemons unleashed. I will not describe the enemy forces in detail because the memory of them still twists something in my mind, still makes me taste bile and corruption. Suffice to say, they were what we had been warned about during scholar training. The Emperor's enemies made manifest. Creatures that should not exist but did, because humanity had failed somewhere, somehow, to maintain the purity that protects against such horrors. The 44th RCT held Fortress Bastion 7, a sprawling complex of reinforced bunkers and weapon emplacements covering a critical approach to the planetary capital. We held for 11 days against continuous assault. I stopped counting my executions after the first week. Men broke under the strain of constant combat, of watching their brothers torn apart by creatures that wore human skin like mockeries, of fighting enemies that sometimes screamed with the voices of loved ones or whispered promises of salvation through surrender. I moved through the trenches with my bolt pistol drawn, and I killed anyone who faltered. I killed anyone who suggested withdrawal. I killed anyone whose nerve broke in any visible way. I became a machine of enforcement, executing judgment with the same mechanical precision that the fortress guns fired their shells. Mercian tried to speak with me on the 8th day. He found me in one of the forward bunkers, surrounded by the smell of burned propellant and the copper stink of blood. I had just executed a sergeant who had been babbling about voices in his head, voices that promised peace if he would just open the fortress gates. The sergeant's body was still cooling when Mercian arrived. "Gaius," he said, using my first name for the first time, "you need to rest. You have been executing men for 3 days straight. The rate of disciplinary failures is increasing, not decreasing. You are not solving the problem." I looked at him through eyes that felt full of sand and ash. "The problem, Colonel, is that your soldiers are human. Humans break under sufficient pressure. My function is to provide pressure that exceeds the enemy's pressure, to make cowardice more terrifying than combat. If I am executing more men, it is because more men are failing, or because you have created a system where fear of the Commissar is causing psychological breakdowns that manifest as the very cowardice you are trying to prevent," Mercian countered. "You are creating a feedback loop of terror." "Then what would you have me do?" I asked, and I genuinely wanted to know. Should I show mercy? Should I allow these breakdowns to spread? Should I let infected soldiers contaminate their units with doubt and fear? Mercian studied the dead sergeant at my feet, then looked back at me. "I would have you remember that you are still human, Gaius. I would have you remember that the men you are executing are the Emperor's servants, not his enemies, and I would have you consider whether the doctrine you are following so faithfully is actually serving his will or simply perpetuating itself through your obedience." I should have executed him right there. By any strict interpretation of commissarial authority, Mercian's words constituted questioning of Imperial doctrine, which was itself a form of heresy. But I did not draw my pistol. Instead, I told him to return to his command duties, and I resumed my patrols through the fortress. I executed 6 more men that night, and each time I pulled the trigger, I thought about Mercian's questions and found I had no answers that satisfied me. The fortress held. On the 12th day, reinforcements arrived, and the Chaos forces withdrew into the wasteland beyond our guns' reach. The 44th RCT had suffered 43% casualties. I had personally executed 72 men for cowardice, heresy, desertion, and related offenses. 72 human beings who had worn the Emperor's uniform and spoken his prayers and served his Imperium until the moment I put bolt rounds through their skulls. The number should have troubled me more than it did, but by that point I had learned to compartmentalize, to section off the parts of my mind that questioned and doubt and hurt. Those parts still existed, but I kept them locked away where they could not interfere with my function. We withdrew from Bastion Primus 3 weeks later. The 44th RCT reduced to battalion strength and folded into a larger task force. Mercian received a commendation for his defense of Fortress Bastion 7. I received nothing, because commissars do not receive commendations. We receive acknowledgement that we continue to function according to specification, that we have not yet failed in our duty. The distinction seems minor, but it matters. Officers are rewarded for success. Commissars are punished for failure. There is no third category. The years that followed blur together in my memory, a succession of deployments and engagements punctuated by executions. I served with the 44th RCT for another 6 years, watching the unit rebuild and deploy and suffer and rebuild again. Mercian and I developed a working relationship based on mutual professional respect and careful distance. He stopped questioning my methods after Bastion Primus. I stopped pretending that my methods required his approval. We fought the Emperor's wars, and we sent men to die, and we did not speak about the weight of what we were doing. I was 39 years old when everything changed. We were deployed to a death world called Gravel's World, so named because its entire surface consisted of endless fields of razor-sharp rock fragments that would shred unprotected flesh in seconds. The planet had no strategic value beyond its position along a key warp route, but the enemy, a heretic army styling themselves, the Crimson Covenant, had established fortified positions there and needed to be dislodged before they could threaten supply lines. The 44th RCT was assigned to a frontal assault on the primary enemy fortress, a task that every officer in the command chain recognized as near suicidal but necessary to fix enemy forces, while more mobile units flanked from the flanks. We began the assault on the morning of the 117th day of the campaign year. The attack started badly and deteriorated from there. The Crimson Covenant had mined the approaches with sophisticated explosive devices that tore through our advance elements. Artillery that intelligence had missed opened up from concealed positions, dropping high explosive shells into our formations. By midday we had advanced barely a kilometer and suffered catastrophic casualties. By evening, Mercian was requesting permission to withdraw and consolidate. High Command denied the request. We were to continue the assault regardless of cost. This was the moment I had been trained for, the situation where the Commissar's authority becomes paramount. Mercian had followed orders into a meat grinder and now wanted to pull back to save what remained of his command. Doctrine was clear: the request for withdrawal constituted potential cowardice, and any officer who persisted in such requests was demonstrating questionable loyalty to the Emperor's will. I should have warned him. I should have reminded him that his duty was to attack until successful or dead. Instead, I accompanied him to the command post and listened as he made his argument again over the Vox link to Division Command. "Sir, the 44th RCT has suffered 70% casualties," Mercian said, his voice level despite the exhaustion lining his face. "We cannot sustain continued assault without reinforcement. Request permission to establish defensive positions and await tactical support." The response crackled through the Vox with the cold certainty of someone located safely away from the killing zone. "Request denied, Colonel Mercian. High Command requires continued pressure on enemy positions. Resume assault immediately." "Sir, that is a death sentence for my remaining troops. I respectfully request reconsideration of—" "Colonel Mercian, you are ordered to resume assault operations immediately. Any further requests for withdrawal will be considered evidence of cowardice and dealt with accordingly." "Acknowledged?" Mercian looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, a kind of resignation that went deeper than acceptance of death, a recognition that the system we served had finally revealed its true nature. He knew what was coming. He had probably known since the moment he made the first request. He was too good an officer not to understand the consequences of questioning orders from high command, especially with a commissar standing 3 meters away. "Acknowledged," Mercian said quietly. He cut the Vox link and turned to face me fully. "Well, Commissar Ventral? Are you going to execute me for cowardice?" I should have said yes. I should have drawn my bolt pistol and ended it there, quickly and cleanly. That was what doctrine demanded, what my training had prepared me for, what the Imperium required of its commissars. But I found myself hesitating, my hand hovering near my holster but not quite drawing the weapon. Something in Mercian's face stopped me, some fundamental weariness that I recognized because I saw it in my own mirror every morning. "You are not a coward, Colonel," I said, the words emerging without conscious volition. "You are an officer attempting to preserve fighting strength for continued operations." "That is a generous interpretation," Mercian replied. "A more accurate one is that I am questioning the wisdom of sacrificing my entire command to achieve a tactical objective that may not even exist. The intelligence on those enemy fortifications was questionable from the start. We may be dying for nothing, Gaius. We may be performing a meaningless ritual sacrifice, because some general 50 light-years away needs to demonstrate resolve to his superiors." There it was, the explicit questioning of Imperial strategy, the suggestion that our orders might be based on faulty premises or political considerations rather than military necessity. This was heresy, or at least the threshold of it. This was the moment where I was supposed to become the instrument of the Emperor's judgment, the moment where I stopped being Gaius Ventral and became only the Commissar, the walking embodiment of discipline and terror. I drew my bolt pistol. Mercian did not flinch. He stood at attention, his eyes locked on mine, waiting for the shot. My finger tightened on the trigger. I could feel the weapon's weight, familiar as my own heartbeat, could anticipate the recoil and the sound and the wet impact of the bolt round finding its target. I could see how this would play out. One quick shot, Mercian's body dropping, a Vox call to Division Command reporting that I had executed the Colonel for cowardice and was assuming direct command of the assault. The 44th RCT would attack again, would die almost to the last soldier, and I would survive because commissars always seemed to survive. We were unkillable as cockroaches, enduring through sheer function while better men perished around us. I did not fire. Instead, I lowered the pistol and holstered it. "Resume the assault, Colonel Mercian," I said. "I will accompany the advance and ensure discipline is maintained. Perhaps we will find that the enemy's strength has been exaggerated." Mercian stared at me in undisguised shock. "You are giving me a reprieve." "I am following doctrine," I lied. "Your request for withdrawal was made once and denied. You have acknowledged orders to continue the assault. Unless you persist in requesting withdrawal, there is no basis for judgment of cowardice. Now resume your duties, Colonel." We both knew I was violating protocol, bending interpretation past the breaking point to avoid doing what I was supposed to do. Mercian knew it. I knew it. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted in our relationship. He nodded slowly, then turned to issue orders for the resumed assault. I left the command post and walked into the killing grounds, my bolt pistol ready, prepared to execute anyone who hesitated or broke or showed any sign of the cowardice I had just tacitly excused in my commanding officer. The assault continued. We took horrible casualties, lost entire squads to enemy fire, watched men torn apart by explosives and small arms, and the 1,000 varieties of death that war provides. I executed 19 men during the next 8 hours of combat, shooting them as they tried to flee or as they collapsed, weeping in their fighting positions, or as they simply stopped functioning as soldiers and became terrified animals looking for any escape. Each execution was necessary, each execution was justified. But each time I pulled the trigger, I thought about Mercian standing at attention in the command post, waiting for me to do to him what I was now doing to his men. We broke through the enemy's outer defenses just before dawn. The Crimson Covenant withdrew to inner positions, and we gained control of a kilometer-wide section of the fortress approaches. The 44th RCT had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. We were down to perhaps 200 functional soldiers from an original strength of 3,000. Mercian survived. I survived. Most of the men I had declined to execute did not. High Command declared the operation a success and redeployed the survivors to rear area duties, while fresh regiments moved up to exploit our breakthrough. Mercian and I never spoke of what had happened in the command post. We both understood that we had crossed a line together, that we had chosen something other than absolute adherence to doctrine, and that this choice had damned us both in ways we could not yet fully comprehend. The 44th RCT was rebuilt again over the following year, absorbing replacements from destroyed units and training them in the combined arms tactics that had become Mercian's signature. I continued my duties as Regimental Commissar, executing those who failed and maintaining the terror that kept discipline intact. But something had changed in how I approached the work. I found myself hesitating fractionally before pulling the trigger, found myself searching for alternative interpretations of situations that previously would have resulted in immediate execution. I was not going soft. My body count for that year exceeded any previous period, but I was questioning in ways I had not questioned before. I was wondering whether the bolt pistol was truly an extension of the Emperor's will, or simply a tool we used to make ourselves feel better about participating in institutional brutality. Commissar Lysan came to inspect our regiment during this period. She had been promoted to senior rank, and now travelled between units, providing oversight and guidance to younger commissars. We shared a meal in the officers' mess, and she studied me with the penetrating gaze of someone who recognized a fellow traveler on dark roads. "You have changed," she said, cutting through small talk with characteristic directness. "Your execution reports show the right numbers, but your after-action summaries have become perfunctory. You used to include details. Now you merely list offenses and punishments." "The details are irrelevant," I said. "The facts are sufficient." "The facts are never sufficient, Gaius. You know that. The details are where we hide from ourselves, where we build the rationalizations that let us sleep at night. When you stop recording the details, it means you have stopped trying to justify what you are doing. It means you have accepted that you are simply a killer in the Emperor's service, and that acceptance is dangerous." "Why is it dangerous?" I asked. "You told me years ago that we are the Emperor's monsters. I have accepted my monstrosity. Isn't that what you advised?" Lysan set down her utensils and fixed me with a look of such profound exhaustion that I felt it in my own bones. "What I advised was that you acknowledge your monstrosity while retaining enough humanity to direct it appropriately. A monster who knows it is a monster can still serve a purpose. A monster who forgets it was ever human becomes simply a rabid animal that needs to be put down. You are approaching that boundary, Gaius. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever happened to you on Gravel's world, yes, I read the classified reports. It broke something that you are now trying to pretend was never whole. You are lying to yourself about what you are, and that lie will eventually destroy you." I wanted to argue with her, to defend my record and my dedication to duty, but she was right. I had been lying to myself, building a version of events where my failure to execute Mercian was somehow compatible with my function as a commissar. I had been telling myself that mercy exercised once made me more human, when in fact it had only highlighted how inhuman I had become in every other circumstance. I was a broken instrument pretending to remain functional, and sooner or later that pretense would fail. "What should I do?" I asked, and the question came out sounding more desperate than I intended. "You should transfer out of active duty," Lysan said. "You should take a posting training new commissars, or working in administration, or serving in some capacity that does not require you to execute guardsmen on a regular basis. You have given enough, Gaius. No one could question your service or your dedication. Take an honorable assignment and let someone else carry this burden for a while." It was good advice, practical and compassionate. I ignored it completely. I remained with the 44th RCT because I could not imagine myself doing anything else, because the bolt pistol had become so much an extension of my identity that I could not conceive of existence without it. I was not Gaius Ventral, who happened to be a commissar. I was a commissar who had once been named Gaius Ventral, and that distinction mattered more than I could articulate. The next 4 years were a blur of deployments and executions. I stopped counting my kills. I stopped filing detailed reports. I became exactly what Lysan had warned against: an instrument of enforcement operating on autopilot, executing judgment without reflection or doubt. I was very effective. My regiment maintained exceptional discipline even under the worst combat conditions. I was very efficient. My execution rate dropped because my mere presence prevented most disciplinary failures before they occurred. I was very empty. Mercian aged noticeably during this period. The man who had been a vigorous 43-year-old commander became a haggard 50-year-old who walked with a slight limp and whose hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. He had been wounded multiple times, had survived situations that should have killed him, and the accumulated trauma was eating him from inside. He still commanded effectively, still made sound tactical decisions, still earned his soldiers' respect and loyalty. But I could see him dying by degrees, could watch pieces of his humanity sloughing away with each campaign. He was becoming what I had already become: a function rather than a person, a role rather than an identity. The end came on a moon designated Terteus Sigma, during what should have been a routine suppression operation against scattered heretic remnants. Intelligence had failed catastrophically. Instead of scattered remnants, we encountered a full-strength heretic army dug into prepared positions. The 44th RCT found itself outnumbered and outmaneuvered, cut off from support and surrounded. Mercian requested immediate evacuation. High Command denied the request. We were to hold our position and fix enemy forces until relief could arrive, estimated at 5 to 7 days. With our current supplies and ammunition, we could hold perhaps 2 days. I knew what was coming even before Mercian made his second request for evacuation. I could see it in his face as he prepared to key the Vox, could see the calculation behind his eyes as he weighed duty against the survival of his soldiers. He was about to cross the line again, and this time I would not be able to excuse it. This time I would have to do what I had failed to do on Gravel's World, what I had been trained to do at the Schola 23 years before, what I had done hundreds of times to men who deserved it less than Mercian now did. "Sir, this is Colonel Mercian of the 44th RCT, he said into the Vox. "We are surrounded and cannot hold for 7 days. I am requesting immediate evacuation of my regiment before we are completely destroyed. We have wounded who need treatment and place." "Request denied," the Vox crackled. "Hold your position, Colonel. That is a direct order." "Sir, with respect, that order is operationally impossible. We will be overrun within 48 hours. I am recommending immediate tactical withdrawal to Colonel Mercian. You are hereby ordered to cease requests for withdrawal and hold your position. Any further questioning of these orders will be considered." Mercian cut the Vox link. He stood there in the communications bunker, his back to me, his shoulders rigid with tension. We both knew what came next. We had both known it would come eventually. From the moment in the command post on Gravel's World when I had chosen not to execute him. That moment had not saved him. It had merely postponed his death by 4 years. And now the debt had come due. "I am sorry, Gaius," Mercian said quietly, still not turning to face me. "I am sorry for what you have to do, for what I am forcing you to do. But I will not send these men to die for nothing. I will not participate in that particular ritual anymore. Call it cowardice if you must. Call it heresy. Call it whatever makes this easier for you. But I am done." I drew my bolt pistol. My hand was steady despite the adrenaline singing in my veins. I had done this so many times that the motion was automatic, required no conscious thought. I raised the weapon and aimed at the back of Mercian's skull. My finger tightened on the trigger, and I found I could not fire. Some fundamental piece of me that I thought had calcified into granite, that I believed had been burned away by years of killing in the Emperor's service, Some essential core of my humanity looked at this man who had served faithfully for decades, who had led from the front and bled alongside his soldiers and made sound tactical decisions that had saved thousands of lives, and it rebelled against the idea of ending him for the crime of trying to preserve his command. "Turn around, Colonel," I heard myself say. Mercian turned slowly. His face was calm, almost peaceful. He had made his choice and accepted its consequences. He was ready to die. He wanted me to do it quickly, to grant him the mercy of a clean death before he could falter or beg. I saw all of this in his expression, and I felt something break inside me that I had not realized was still whole enough to break. "I cannot execute you," I said. The words felt like pulling out my own teeth, like confessing to a sin I had not known I was committing. I should, by every standard of doctrine and duty, I should put a bolt round through your skull right now. But I cannot do it, Victor. I cannot kill you for trying to save your men. Mercian stared at me in shock. I had never used his first name before. Commissars maintained distance, enforced the barrier between enforcer and subject. By speaking his name, I had acknowledged him as a person rather than a function, and that acknowledgement was itself a kind of heresy. "Then what will you do?" Mercian asked. I honestly did not know. I stood there in that communications bunker on Terteus Sigma with my bolt pistol still drawn and the weight of 23 years of service pressing down on me like the gravity of a dead star. I had spent my entire adult life enforcing discipline through terror, had killed hundreds of men and women to maintain the system that kept the Imperium functioning, and now, at the moment when that system demanded I do what it had always demanded, I found I had no more killing left in me. "I will help you save the regiment," I said. "And then I will turn myself in to the commissariat for failure to execute duty. But I will not kill you, Victor. Not today. Not for this." We evacuated the 44th RCT over the next 18 hours in direct defiance of orders from High Command. Mercian coordinated a fighting withdrawal while I used my commissarial authority to commandeer transport assets from other units. We lost approximately 40% of the regiment during the breakout, but we saved the rest. 60% survival was better than the 0% that waiting for relief would have produced. It was a tactical success and a strategic insubordination. I turned myself in 7 hours after the last transport cleared Terteus Sigma's gravity well. A senior commissar arrived to take my report and my sidearm. He listened to my confession with the same granite expression that Haldrecht had worn all those years ago at my commissioning ceremony. When I finished speaking, he asked me a single question. "Do you believe you have failed in your duty, Commissar Ventral?" I thought about Private Messon with his trembling hands and his need for alcohol to sleep. I thought about the lieutenant, who whispered his daughter's name as he died. I thought about the 72 men I had executed at Bastion Primus, and the 143 I had killed on Gravel's World, and the thousands of others across 23 years of service. I thought about Mercian standing at attention in the command post, waiting for me to shoot him. I thought about what Commissar Lysan Kelter had said about monsters who forget they were ever human. "Yes," I said, "I have failed completely." The senior commissar nodded slowly. "Then you understand what must happen now." I understood. I had always understood. The bolt pistol was not merely a tool for enforcing discipline on others. It was also the solution to commissars who failed in their duty, who broke under the burden of what they were required to do. How many commissars had I heard about who had died in combat, whose deaths were recorded as heroic and honorable? How many of those had actually been suicides, men and women who had finally found they could no longer continue and had chosen the bolt pistol for themselves? How many monsters had put themselves down before they could become rabid? They gave me 3 days to put my affairs in order. I spent those days aboard the Adamant Tithe, in the quarters that had belonged to Colonel Mercian until his death from wounds received during our withdrawal from Terteus Sigma. He had survived the breakout only to die of infected injuries 2 weeks later, his body finally giving out after years of accumulated trauma. I am told he died peacefully, which is more mercy than most officers receive. I am told he did not curse my name, which is more mercy than I deserve. I write this confession in those same quarters, using Mercian's desk and his chemical lamp and the stylus he used for his tactical assessments. The bolt pistol sits beside the page, loaded with a single round. I have verified the round multiple times, checked the action and the trigger mechanism, and everything else that might affect function. I am very good at maintaining weapons. It is one of the many things they taught me at the Schola. In 6 hours I will put the muzzle beneath my chin and pull the trigger, and my story will end the way so many stories end in the Imperium, with a burst of violence and a body cooling in the darkness. Some other commissar will assume responsibility for maintaining discipline, will execute those who fail, and maintain the terror that keeps the system functioning. The system will continue because the system always continues. Individual failure is irrelevant to institutional persistence. But before I die, I wanted to write down what I have learned during my 23 years of service. I wanted to leave some record, however inadequate, of what it means to be the Emperor's monster, and what it costs to maintain that monstrosity over time. These lessons may prove worthless, they may be destroyed unread, may vanish into the vast archives of the Imperium, where millions of similar confessions moulder in forgotten data stacks. But I will write them anyway, because the alternative is to die believing that everything I did was meaningless, and I am not quite ready to accept that particular damnation. First lesson. The bolt pistol is not an extension of the Emperor's will. It is merely a tool, and like all tools it can be used for constructive or destructive purposes. We tell ourselves it serves a higher purpose, because the alternative, accepting that we are simply killing people to maintain a system that may itself be flawed, is too horrible to contemplate. But the truth is that every time I pulled the trigger, I was making a choice. I was deciding that this particular human life was worth less than abstract concepts like discipline and duty and imperial necessity. I was wrong to think myself an instrument. I was always the one responsible, and my responsibility is absolute. Second lesson. Terror is an effective tool for maintaining discipline, but it is also corrosive to the very system it seeks to protect. Every soldier I executed for cowardice was a soldier who might have regained his courage with support and understanding. Every officer I shot for questioning orders was an officer who might have been right about tactical realities on the ground. The commissariat enforces compliance, but compliance is not the same as effectiveness. We have built an Imperium where men fight harder because they fear their own officers more than they fear the enemy, and we have told ourselves this represents strength, when it actually represents a catastrophic failure of institutional design. Third lesson. Humanity is not weakness. Compassion is not heresy. The urge to save lives rather than spend them is not cowardice, but wisdom. I was taught that these emotions represented failures of will, that a proper commissar transcended such softness through dedication to duty. But I now believe that transcending humanity does not make you more effective. It makes you a malfunctioning machine that no longer recognizes when it is causing more harm than good. The commissar who cannot imagine mercy has become a danger to the very Imperium he serves. Fourth lesson. The system perpetuates itself through the complicity of those who serve it. I could have refused my first execution. I could have questioned whether Private Messon deserved to die for smuggling alcohol. I could have reported my doubts to my superiors and requested reassignment. Instead, I executed Messon and told myself it was necessary, and that first execution made the second easier, and the second made the third easier, until I had killed hundreds and no longer questioned whether any of it served a legitimate purpose. I am not blameless. I chose this path. I participated willingly in a system of institutional brutality, and my participation validated that system for those who came after me. Fifth lesson. There is no redemption for what I have done. No amount of regret can resurrect the dead. No confession can undo 23 years of killing in the name of duty. I am writing these lessons not because I believe they will redeem me, but because someone needs to speak the truth about what the commissariat demands of those who serve in it. Someone needs to state clearly that the bolt pistol is not holy, that execution is not justice, that terror is not an acceptable foundation for human civilization. These truths may be heresy, they may be evidence of corruption or weakness, but they are still true. The chemical lamp gutters as I write this final section. The stylus is running dry. Time itself seems to be pressing against me, reminding me that I have only a few hours left before I must fulfill my final duty. I find I am not afraid of death. After 23 years of dealing death to others, it seems only fair that death should finally come for me. What I fear is that my death will change nothing, that some other young commissar will graduate from the schola, filled with the same righteous certainty I once possessed, will draw his bolt pistol for the first time, and feel the same grim satisfaction I felt when I executed Private Messon. What I fear is that the system will continue unchanged, that my confession will be read and filed and forgotten, that the Imperium will go on spending human lives like currency in service of abstractions and ambitions that may themselves be corrupt. But I write anyway, because silence is complicity, because someone needs to speak even if no one is listening, because I owe it to Private Messon and the lieutenant who whispered his daughter's name, and the 72 men at Bastion Primus, and all the others whose names I can no longer remember. I owe them the truth about what was done to them in the Emperor's name, even if that truth comes too late to matter. Commissar Lysan Kelter was right about monsters who forget they were human. She was right about the danger of accepting your monstrosity without maintaining some connection to what you once were. I became that rabid animal she warned me against, became a killing machine that operated without reflection or mercy, and now I am doing what rabid animals must do when they can no longer serve their purpose. I am putting myself down before I can cause any more damage. In my final hours, I think about Colonel Victor Mercian, standing in the communications bunker on Terteus Sigma, ready to die rather than sacrifice his soldiers for nothing. I think about his courage in that moment, the moral courage to choose human lives over abstract duty. I wish I had possessed that courage earlier. I wish I had been strong enough to question, to refuse, to choose humanity over doctrine, before I killed hundreds in service of a system that may not deserve such service. But wishes are luxuries, and I have spent my allotment of luxuries. I have spent everything, given everything, killed everything within myself that might have objected to what I was doing, and now there is nothing left but this confession and this bolt pistol, and the 6 hours remaining before I must use one to complete the other. The Emperor protects, they told us at the Schola. The Emperor protects those who serve him faithfully. But I no longer know what that means, or whether it was ever true. All I know is that I have served, and that service has cost me everything I was, and everything I might have been. All I know is that the bolt pistol is heavy in my hand, and the round chambered is true, and when I pull the trigger this time, I will not be executing anyone else's cowardice. I will be executing my own. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is the truth about what it means to serve the Imperium as a commissar, about what the bolt pistol really is, about what we become when we convince ourselves that duty justifies atrocity. Read it or destroy it as you will. Believe it or dismiss it as the ravings of a broken mind. It no longer matters to me what you think. I am Gaius Ventral, and I was a commissar for 23 years. I killed hundreds in the name of duty. I maintained discipline through terror. I enforced the Emperor's will as I understood it, and I never questioned whether my understanding was correct. Now I know better, and the knowledge has come too late to save anyone. The bolt pistol is not an extension of the Emperor's will. It is merely a tool, and I have finally learned how to use it properly. May the Emperor forgive me. May he forgive us all, because I cannot.